Hello and welcome back to Let's Have a Chat About Murder. Thank you for joining me today, I really appreciate it. And all you listening on Murder Analysed and on our podcast Let's Have a Chat About Murder, welcome to this case today. Now today's case is the Lynnette White case. Now first of all with this case I want to go through the timeline of events because this is a complex case, quite a lot of failings in it, but I'm telling you now, this girl's murder was horrific. And when you find out the reasons why, it even makes it worse. So in the 14th of February 1988, Lynnette, who was 20, from Cardiff, Docklands in Cardiff area, she was found murdered in her flat. She had had a terrible, terrible death. You could tell that she had fought for her life. She had 50 plus stab wounds to her body. This was an overkill, to say the least. Then in 1998 to 1989, the police investigation focused on 5 local men, and they are known as the. So in 1990, 3 men, Paris, Abdoli and Miller, were convicted of Lynnette's murder. Gets complicated, wait for it. In 1992, the Court of Appeal overturned these convictions as a miscarriage of justice. Now, I'm telling you now, this was one of the worst in our history, really, of a miscarriage of justice. It was absolutely terrible what happened to these 5. Because even the ones that were not convicted on that day and sent to prison for life for this murder, this horrific crime, their lives was tainted, because they was always linked to Lynnette's murder, even though they hadn't done it. So you can imagine what life all 5 of these Cardiff boys had. So in 2003, thank God for DNA, right, really, because it was through DNA and the breakthroughs in DNA in 2003 that the real killer here was caught. Because when you stab someone 50 plus times, right, and in them days, in 1988, there was no such thing really as DNA. It was just coming out. Most people didn't even realise it was around. It was still in its infancy, you know, unheard of, really, in the mainstream. So, of course, he left fingerprints and everything, but when you stab someone that amount of times in the rage that this man must have been in, the knife, as you're going in, will cut you. So his blood and his DNA and everything was on her body and in this flat. Thank God, the only thing that these early investigation did was preserve the evidence. Give them that. But that's all you can give them, really. So terrible, this investigation, this first investigation, really bad. So in 2003, the actual killer was caught, and that was Gafoor, and he only confessed though, once he had been proven that he couldn't explain why his DNA was there, and DNA evidence had put him at the crime and his blood at the crime, in places where it shouldn't have been, right? So he didn't want to confess. Don't forget, this man had been free 4 years, living amongst the society, after stabbing someone and allowing 5 other people to go, to take the blame for his crime. It's shocking. So anyway, this is the Lynnette White case, and it's very sad, but it needs to be told because there's so many failings here, and it brings us back again now to a police investigation, the first one, which wasn't conducted in any way the way it should have been. So, if you're ready, let's go.
Let's have a chat.
Yeah. Sometimes I get so mad, there's no controlling me. My thoughts get so bad, I'm like, I might grab a bat, I don't know. My wrath, my blood boils over like, oh God, here goes. I lost all feeling from my head to my toes. You said some shit that I can't let go, so just stay tuned for the rest of the show.
So today we are going to look at this case, and it takes us right back to 1998, and it takes us back to this, I think, darkest of miscarriages of justice that I've ever read, to tell you the truth. You know, we have a lot of people that saying I'm innocent, but around this time, if the police had it in for you and had their blinkers on that you've done it, there was nothing else, was there, to prove that you hadn't. So when DNA, I suppose, come into it, that's when we can now not only prosecute people for the crimes, historic crimes that they have done, but also prove that people were innocent of them crimes. So thank God for technology and thank God for DNA across the board when it comes to crime. So Lynnette White, now she was a young girl, brutally murdered on Valentine's Day, 14th of February 1988. It was a horrific crime, without a doubt. Lynnette White was just 20 years old at the time of this murder. She lived in Cardiff's Docklands, and Docklands in Cardiff are not like they are now. Most Docklands are not like they are now in 1988. She was struggling to make ends meet. She had a boyfriend, which was one of the accused, but he was just a boyfriend. She was facing hardship and she did work as a sex worker to make ends meet. So the problem is with that is not the job itself, because it's choice, but you are much more, as a victim, open to so many people that could have done this crime. And I don't even think the police at that time looked at that. She was known to be kind and vulnerable, right? She was quite a vulnerable girl, only 20, living in this flat, trying to feed herself, pay her rent, all this sort of stuff in 1988, and having to do that sort of work to get herself by. The environment in them days and for this girl was harsh. So there shouldn't be any judgment for anyone that does this sort of work. People do this work because they need to. Very few do it because they actually like it. So on the 14th of February 1998, Lynnette was found dead in her flat above the betting shop in Cardiff in Tiger Bay area. She was stabbed more than 50 times. The violence was frenzied, and the scene, I'm telling you, was horrific. There was blood everywhere. This was a crime scene where, without a doubt, there would have been evidence, even in them days. The worst thing, I think, of all with this investigation of these absolutely ridiculous detectives, you can't call them detectives, can you? Just can't, because they just absolutely failed in every aspect of an investigation, especially such a major investigation of this. And we've heard this a lot, haven't we, from different cases around these sort of times, really, even more recent than that, with South Wales Police. Hopefully now changes are being made, but I can't take it away from the second investigation team, the cold case team. They done their job, right? But to tell the truth, the job was actually quite easy for them because the evidence was there. So when we look now, I think the real story about this case, which really affects me, is that yes, the wrong men were convicted. But this true killer, way before, right, 2003, right from the beginning, could have been caught. Right from the beginning. Police chose to pursue a narrative of what they thought happened in this flat, targeting vulnerable men in their communities, and this justice really was delayed for 15 years. 15 years. This case has become a landmark British legal history. It's landmarked in history. You can't, when you research different things, especially in law, as a miscarriage of justice and what not to do in an investigation, or, this is it, right? It ain't going to get any better than this. So if you're learning law, this is the one to look at for miscarriages of justice, because when you actually read the whole case file, it is bloody shocking at the lengths that these investigators went to prove these boys did it, even though they didn't. So if they had literally not had that bias and that pressure to secure a conviction, and to sort of override evidence that was actually in that flat of Lynnette's, this man should have been questioned. If they'd questioned him and used all the investigating skills that they were meant to have had, he would have been prime suspect, really, right from the beginning. And that's what makes this case so bad, because all that was put aside because some detectives believed they were right. In any criminal case, in any murder case, actually in any case where it involves evidence, evidence doesn't lie, right? Police officers lie, detectives lie, obviously. Evidence doesn't lie. So if you follow the evidence, and if the evidence is there, and sometimes it's not, right? But if it is, then you will get your person. You will find out what happened. Because evidence never lies. It can't. But humans and people that have agendas and people that think they're maybe better than these, Cardiff Five, they didn't follow the evidence. And because they didn't follow the evidence, this is what the outcome is. So for 15 years, a violent criminal, a violent murderer, was on our streets. Shocking. Look, Lynnette was this young woman, right, who had her life taken in such a horrific, violent way. But our case must remind us all, right, it must, not only for the brutality of the crime, but for the injustice that followed, right? This case is about everything. The Cardiff Five suffered years in prison for the crime that they did not do. And the real killer is Jeffrey Godfrey, lived free, really, until science, and it is science, this DNA, caught up with him. I suppose the case changed the way now, or it should have changed the way that police investigate. And I think if we look now at the second case, when he was convicted in 2003, you can see that the other investigators did learn lessons from that. I think with the first case, you just pick it up and you chuck it in a bin, right? That's the only good that would do, burn it, right? Because really, it was the second case, the second investigation, that really highlights what good detectives can do. So when we look at this first investigation, and we're just going to look at it quickly again to highlight the flaws in this. So South Wales Police, these detectives did say that they were under immense pressure to get a conviction in this case. Okay, we're all under pressure, right? But to avoid, as I've said before, and to just not take into account any evidence at all, not to investigate, and to be blindsided and blinkered in your faults, is not the way to do it. Sometimes, right, no matter how much you investigate, how good your investigation skills are, killers go free because they don't leave evidence. That's not true in this case, but in some it is. It's not the police's fault because, as I said before, when you are looking for a killer like this, or like these sort of killers, sometimes they don't leave evidence, and today they're much more forensically aware than you would give them credit for. So yes, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack sometimes, but that's why some killers don't get caught. They just don't. This is not that case at all. The evidence was there, and really, this should never have happened. They were tunnel vision, I think, in their investigation. And they were fixated on the Cardiff Five. It was like, that was it. That was it. You've done it. And we're going to coerce you and manipulate you and pressure you to say you did. Because we need a conviction in this case. Shocking. We have to talk about, in this first investigation, the racial bias. Now, these five were black or mixed race men, and they were disproportionately targeted by this investigation for no good reason, right? So there is racial bias there because there was no other reason why these people were investigated, let alone charged and imprisoned for this murder. There was no evidence at all. Also, what the police were in the first investigation accused of was the manipulation of witnesses and also ignoring the contradictions. So if one of these Cardiff Five had witnesses to say, I was there all night, they manipulated that and didn't use that. These people had alibis, and then the police wouldn't take their alibis and then manipulated even the witnesses in this case. So this case, as I said, if you are studying law or you're interested in a case of this sort of injustice, this is a perfect case for you, really. So in early 2000s, after this wrongful conviction was overturned, 13 officers were charged with offences including perjury, preventing the course of justice. The charges related to the way the evidence had been fabricated or manipulated to secure this conviction. However, the trial collapsed in 2011 after a judge ruled that delays had made their hearing impossible. So a fair hearing impossible. Because now the public are aware, people like me are aware of what they'd done. And so the judge said that they couldn't be taken forward because it would really prejudice there, and then they would have come back on appeal and they would have said because it's so public and people know everything, they wouldn't be their evidence that they was going to give wouldn't be held up because they would believe that people wouldn't believe them. Probably, but they should have been sacked or whatever. So really where they should have been really put in prison themselves, I think, for the mistakes that they made, lost their jobs, lost their pensions, lost everything, because these are not good police officers. But then we also don't know, when we talk about these police officers, these detectives, what pressure was coming from above. Because the court case didn't come to light, what was their evidence? They already said that they were pressured into having a result, right? So usually it's not just your detectives, you have lots of people looking into these cases. Also the CPS, right, should have looked into this case way before and made sure the evidence was correct. But if they had falsified evidence and stuff, then of course the CPS would have got their version of events, wouldn't they? So that's sort of why their case fell apart and why really nothing's actually been done about them apart from this case is used. Really, it's a landmark case and no one's ever going to forget it. So they've got that. So the real failures, when we break it down into basic failures, would be ignoring forensic evidence, no physical evidence linked to the Cardiff Five at all, because they weren't there. They didn't do it. Simple, right? Simple. Relied on intimidation methods, and the case was built on confessions extracted under duress and also corruption and cover-ups. Officers later accused of lying under oath to protect the investigation. Really? Destroyed police public trust. Well, we're talking about the UK now. That trust is just out the window. Maybe in 2003 people used to have some respect for the police. I think now that's just gone, and this case wouldn't have helped that at all. So I think it forced the reputation, and really the reputation of the police, especially the South Wales police, was damaged, severely damaged. So the legacy, I suppose, when we talk about Lynnette White's case, it becomes a symbol really of police misconduct in the UK. As I said, police officers should look at this case, right? If you want a wannabe detective, should look at this case, because there's so many failings in this case. You should learn something from it. Up and coming people that want to do law should learn it. If you want to find out about the real mistakes and injustices that go on in this country, you should read this case. It's bloody shocking. So years later, the South Wales police formally apologised and acknowledged their failings. Okay, good for them. Good for them. Because they had to, right? They had to. Now, I am not slating every officer. We, on both Murder Analysed and on Let's Have a Chat About Murder, we look at some of the most serious cases in the UK and around the world. And I have seen and talked to and read so many cases that have had excellent detectives working on them, give their time. Some of these cases can take years, even cold cases can take years to come out with a result. So it's not all police officers, but what this case has done has highlighted that, especially around this time, there were many that thought that they were above the law, right? So they weren't just detectives, were they? They were falsifying evidence because they believed we need a result, you're going to prison. So, and then falsifying all the evidence to the CPS and to the court, intimidating witnesses, all this sort of stuff. What does that make them, right? And that's why a lot of people now don't trust police investigations. But as I said, most detectives who work in the police and have worked in the police for many, many years are really good at their job, and they do not falsify anything because they don't need to, because they rely on their skills, their investigating skills, to find out who really done these crimes. So I'm not slating all police, but I'm certainly slating these ones because they deserve it. And they have really the reputation of police forces across this country are in dire straits at the minute. Let's look at this psychological profile now of this Jeffrey Gafoor. He was a male, and he was born in 1963. He was 38 at the time of his conviction. 38 at the time of his conviction. So he was 25 at the time of Lynnette White's murder. 25. He worked as a security guard. Well, that's a worry, isn't it? Well, he could, didn't he? Because he didn't have any bloody criminal record. So he could. If anyone had known what he's done, he wouldn't be allowed near bloody to be a security for anybody. Relatively ordinary lifestyle, not widely known as violent. He wasn't. But then most men that attack women like this are not known for their violence outside on the streets. They're not like they're hard men going to go around punching up someone who's a security guard, right? Standing there with his little uniform and badge, telling people what to do. It's good enough for him. That's all he could do. He won't be doing that anymore, I'll tell you that now. Anyway, lived quietly in Cardiff. Oh, I bet he did. And largely avoided suspicion until the DNA linked him to the murder. Now, his traits. So he had repressed anger. You can tell that by the 50-odd stab wounds, can't you? He was in a rage when he done that. So this is this repressed anger. But I think he let it go on her because he thought she was worthless. I really do. He was outwardly unremarkable, right? Blended in with the crowd. It's unremarkable. There's nothing remarkable about this man. Really, nothing at all. Blended into his community, not seen as a threat, which helped him, I think, evade even in the local community didn't think it was him. And usually, as I say, gossip's a good thing, because there's some truth in gossip. But no one really believed it was him because he was so underwhelmed in his life. He had nothing, right? People didn't recognise him. He would walk down the street, and to tell the truth, you wouldn't bat an eye. He ain't one of them that you would call in the local community may have been a troublemaker or whatever, because he wasn't. He wasn't. Didn't have the guts for that, right, to fight men, but he did have the guts to stab a woman 50 plus times. So yes, it makes him dangerous. He was avoidant and secretive. So he kept this crime hidden for 15 years. Hard thing, isn't it? I bet he was shitting himself, mate, when he was watching the telly and all this latest DNA stuff. Our forensic science, how it was coming on. One day he knew he was going to get a knock at that door. He must have. Or he probably thought, we'll keep to a simple life, do nothing, no one will find me. Because they fucked up, really, the investigation the first time. He believed, well, they're not coming for me, are they? Because they're bloody stupid. That's probably what he believed. That's probably what most people believed, to tell you the truth, until this man was arrested. See, guilt management. He was able to maintain his guilt. He must have had guilt over this, surely. at some point. I don't know though. You tell me. Give me a comment. Do you think he was actually guilt-ridden and he had to live with his guilt? No, I don't think he did. I don't think he did actually, to tell the truth. I think he just had this emotional detachment from that crime. He'd forgot about it. He'd done it all them years ago. Other people have had their lives messed up. I'm free. You know, these police force are stupid. These detectives don't know what they're doing. So I've got away with it. And I think he detached from it. And that's how he probably got away with it. Because as I said, he's not really much about this man to attract the police to his door, really. Or any community people thinking, could have been him. You know, these people are very good. He was quite a good manipulator, I think. And I think he did, section up his life, compartmentalise it into where he could live with it, get on with life, because he believed he was never going to get caught. Financial stress, I think, is what triggered it. Now, Lynnette's murder arose during an argument over the money, the £30. He reacted as being in an extreme way, disproportionate to that event, really. It really is, and that's what makes him quite dangerous. It was an overkill, really. She was stabbed like 50 times plus, suggested that this was an uncontrolled outburst, not a calculated kill. Right? There's no way this was a calculated kill. This man just went for it. That was it. Forensic DNA left DNA on the scene. He had no forensic awareness at all, because in them days they didn't. There was no lack of planning and no understanding of forensic awareness at all. I think later on, as I said, when he'd been watching, and he would have been watching things on these latest techniques of investigation, he would have been shitting himself, I think. So when we look at his post-crime conduct, as I said in the beginning, he did not at all confess to any part of this until the DNA evidence was put in front of him. He denied, and it was self-preservation, I think. I think that was his remorse that he got caught. He had no remorse at all for Lynnette. None. So this man, I wouldn't say he's a serial killer type or a predator. I think he lost his shit in them days. I think he is prone to where he could lose his shit again, right? And I think if he thinks you are unworthy, in his eyes, that you're right to be killed. He wanted power over someone because his life was so ordinary. And I think over Lynnette, he had that power and that control, and he took it on that day. He was pissed off because she didn't have his money, and so he did that to her because he felt he could. This spontaneousness of this violence, this outburst, right, not premeditated as such, but in that flat, when you stab someone once, you can say, I lost control, and it's just because, you know, she owed me money, I'm frustrated and stuff like this. When you stab someone 50 plus times, enough times that the amount of stab wounds are overlapping and no one can tell how many times you've been stabbed, it's murder. I suppose in summary, when we look at his profile, Jeffrey was not a calculated predator, but an impulsive and violent man who lost control during this confrontation, but couldn't stop himself. For some reason, as I've gone through before, I think he didn't feel that she was worth being alive in his eyes. In frustration rather than planning. It makes something, you know, serial killers and predators plan a lot because they don't want to get caught. You know, they want to be in control of the whole situation. This man isn't none of that. I think when we look at his psychological profile, to sum him up, I suppose he reflects a violent, ordinary seeming offender in some ways. Someone capable of blending into society, which he did for 15 years, even after this crime, but harbouring dangerous impulses and erupts, really, in a catastrophic, violent way. Who says he won't do it again? So, let's talk about the sentencing of this man, shall we? So he's gone to court. Now, in 2003, he was convicted of Lynnette's murder for all the things that we've just discussed. Right? Finally, they've got him. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 13 years. Yeah, 13 years. Now, as I've said before, when you have these life to 13 years, you don't just sort of come out after 13 years. Some do. He didn't. So in 2016, the minimum tariff expired and he was eligible then to apply for his first parole or review hearing. Of course he went for it. He wants out, right? Served my time, done 13 years, it's 2016. 2016 to 2019, multiple parole reviews refused. Risk, I think, judge was too high. So when you go into these parole, your risk, are you a risk to the public, right? So right up until 2019, he was still classed as a risk to the public. Even though he'd served his minimum tariff of 13 years, he was then still in 2019. But 2020 approved for open conditions in prison. So then he moved from secure prison. So because he was believed high risk. By 2020 though, he was moved then to an open prison conditions. And this is the first step really to downgrade him, right, from this closed prison. So in 2023, he was granted day release to test his behaviour outside prison walls. In 2024, the 6th parole review approved his release after 21 years in custody. So he had served 8 years beyond his tariff of 13 years before he was released. So, he is out. Now, when we look at predators like this, and we've gone through his profile, and we've talked about his profile, he murdered Lynnette over a £30 debt. Right? £30 debt. The pressure of coming out of prison in 2025 to where he won't be able to work. He couldn't go back to security work, there's no way. People now know who he is, what he's done. People also know that he withheld the truth for so many years. And so he's out. So where we believed he may have committed that crime because it was over a £30 debt, and that's what he said it was over. That sort of pressure build up, that financial build up of pressure and everything else. What do you think is going to happen now? We don't know about this man. We don't. Right? How long can you keep someone in prison? Well, the girl was 20. Multiple stabbings, a horrific death. Right? Her life surely is worth more than that. But the rules are the rules, I suppose, and he's been released out. Or shortly will be. And when you're in prison, especially as they're assessing your risks, you haven't got the financial hardships. You've got pressure, don't get me wrong, right? You have pressure of staying alive most of the time in these prisons. You know, fighting, especially for this man. Because I said he's not really relevant, as you would call him. So in prison, he would even be less so. On the streets, people didn't really notice him and recognise him. In prison, he would have been the same, right? They wouldn't have. So he probably would have been picked on in prison. And so he wanted to get out for that reason. But what I'm talking about is the financial responsibilities and the pressures of life in 2025 in the UK, right? Living in England is not easy. It is not cheap, right? So if you thought you had pressure having a £30 debt, my God, what's he going to be like now? So that's my worry with this sort of a person. You know, if he'd, as I said, stabbed her once and it was just a, you know, loss of control, okay, you can sort of argue it. But the amount of stabbings this girl got, the overkill, the forensic attack on this girl was terrible on Lynnette. This girl had a horrific death. And that's my worry about someone like this being released. So we will just have to wait and see. I'll give you some updates on this case when I find out more. But hopefully we won't. Hopefully this man will now go back to his life that he led after Lynnette's murder, of just blending in to society. Let's hope, because you don't want this man losing his shit again, do we? So anyway, thanks for joining me on Let's Have a Chat About Murder. Remember, subscribe, do all you got to do, because I always forget to say it. Follow me on Murder Analysed as well, because you can go between the two. There's no two cases the same. And listen on Spotify or any other place that you get your great podcasts. So thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye bye.